They noticed the silence first, not in any dramatic fashion, not with fire or wreckage or screams broadcast across interstellar bands, but with an absence. A hollow in the usual chaos. Earth's usual hum, its chatter, the static and signals that once pulsed through space like the heartbeat of a noisy, stubborn species. It just stopped. No transmissions, no probes, no ship traffic in or out of Sol. At first, the Galactic Concord dismissed it. Humans had always been erratic, loud, aggressive, obnoxiously clever, but unreliable. Emotional creatures with a strange obsession with self-destruction. Maybe they'd finally turned their madness inward. The official statement from the High Council was that Earth had simply collapsed under its own weight. But the veterans? The soldiers who had fought beside them? The alien generals who once feared Earth's mercenaries and their brutal tactics? They didn't believe it. Something was wrong. Commander Threx, a battle-hardened veteran of the Drakir Wars, remembered the way humans fought. Dirty, relentless, and with a grin on their face even when bleeding. He'd watched a human soldier pull a shard of plasma shrapnel from his own stomach just to crawl forward and plant explosives beneath an enemy crawler. That soldier died laughing as the entire field went up in flames. Earth didn't go quiet. Not like this. Not on its own. The silence lasted months, then a year, then 3. Human colonies stopped responding too. The ones under the protection of the Galactic Concord found their communication relays fried from the inside. Fried. Not destroyed. No trace of external hacking. No virus. Just gone. And then came the first sign. It was small, quiet, dismissed by most. A lone cargo freighter drifting through the Ashen Belt picked up an anomaly, a black box beacon transmitting a 4-second loop. Only 4 words. We are not gone. The freighter captain thought it was a prank, but protocol demanded he send it to Galactic Intelligence. They traced the signal back, or tried to, but the source kept shifting. At first it came from the ruins of a human mining station. Then, 3 days later, it blinked from a derelict ship in the orbit of Virex 7. A week later, from the border of uncharted space near the Vantari expanse. Always 4 seconds. Always the same words. We are not gone. By the time someone took it seriously, things were already unraveling. The Valtari Syndicate, one of the most powerful and ruthless alien empires, began losing ships in the outer rings. No distress calls, no wreckage, just gone. Trade convoys vanished. Pirate fleets disappeared mid-raid. And then the footage came in. A battleship, Valtari class, 7 decks high, completely hollowed, gutted from the inside with surgical precision, no external damage, every crew member removed. Not killed, removed. Like someone had come in and erased their existence cell by cell. Carved into the wall of the command deck, written in dried blood, was a message. You watched us burn. Now watch yourselves rot. Panic spread. Quietly, at first. The Galactic Concord still clung to the belief that this was unrelated. Pirates, rogue AIs, a glitch in the ship's systems. Anything but humanity. But more messages followed. Always in human languages. Carved, burned, etched. Silence is not surrender. You abandoned Earth. We remember. Old friends started locking their borders. Empires who once begged Earth for military aid now treated their memory like a disease. Whispers of the revenants spread like a plague. They were human, but not. Faster, smarter, colder. And they didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They appeared like shadows, shut down entire outposts, wiped data cores, and left messages that cut deeper than weapons. They weren't looking to conquer. They were dismantling everything that once stood by and watched Earth fall. Because that was the truth. Earth didn't die from within. It was betrayed. It wasn't war. It was economic isolation, biological embargoes, a quiet, coordinated effort by the conquered to cut off humanity, fearing their growth, their influence, their unpredictability. Earth begged for help when the famine hit, when the solar flares disrupted tech, when the engineered plague wiped out half the northern hemisphere. No one came. So Earth stopped talking and started preparing. Now the stars weren't quiet because Earth was gone. They were quiet because everyone was waiting to see who would be next. The first time Commander Threx saw one of them with his own eyes, he didn't believe it was real. He wished it hadn't been. The distress beacon came from a high-orbit refinery in the neutral zone near the Crux line, just outside conquered territory. It was a small, automated facility. Nothing of strategic value. No permanent crew. Just maintenance droids and mining bots scraping thorium from asteroid debris. When Threx's cruiser, Valen's Mercy, arrived, everything looked untouched. No signs of breach. No damage to the external systems. The autodocs were still spinning. Power grid intact. Even the signal array was operational. But inside? Inside, it was like death had waited patiently, done its work quietly, and left with surgical precision. 17 bodies, all engineers, off-duty contractors from various conquered worlds. They had no weapons, no security protocols triggered, their bodies were untouched, no burns, no bullet wounds, no internal trauma, just brain dead, all of them. Every single one had collapsed at their workstation. They were frozen in place, eyes open, faces twisted in sheer terror. Not like someone scared them. No, like someone showed them something their minds couldn't survive. Threx remembered leaning over one of the bodies, trying to understand what killed a man without leaving a single wound. The only thing out of place was the writing on the wall, again in that jagged, almost obsessive human scrawl. "You heard us scream. You chose silence." He didn't sleep that night, didn't speak for 3 days. But that was nothing compared to what came next. The attack on Forge Station was impossible. It wasn't just a military hub, it was the military hub. Orbiting the fourth moon of Terrace Prime, Forge was a floating fortress. 3,000 soldiers, automated turrets, firewalls so complex not even the illegal tech cults of Vale could break them. It vanished in 7 minutes. No ships detected approaching, no breach in the shields, just static. Then nothing. When the Conquered finally dispatched an investigative fleet, they found the station, half of it, still orbiting. The rest had been cut away. Like it had been sliced down the middle with something sharper than plasma and colder than vacuum. Like someone had dissected a war machine and took only the parts they wanted. On what remained of the command bridge, a live feed flickered. A face. Human. Male. Rough, unshaven, gaunt, like someone who hadn't slept in years. Eyes like black glass. He didn't speak, but he looked directly at the camera, unmoving, unblinking. Then he raised his hand and held up 4 fingers, then 3, then 2, then 1. Then the transmission cut to black, a warning, a countdown. The next target was Chorus Ring, a diplomatic station orbiting 3 conquered capital systems. They doubled security, triple-checked their perimeter scans, deployed stealth drones in every direction, brought in elite soldiers from the Hydery worlds. Didn't matter. At precisely 100 local time, every oxygen system in the station vented at once. Everyone died. No alarms triggered, no systems logged any overrides, just silence. And in the mess hall, scrawled in frost on the interior glass, were 6 words. "Now you know how it feels." Threx's hands trembled when he read that report. He had fought in 23 campaigns across 14 sectors. He'd seen colonies burn. He'd seen entire species wiped out. He'd watched men beg for death and enemies scream for mercy that never came. But nothing felt like this. Because this wasn't war. This was calculated memory. Whoever, whatever these revenants were, They weren't just attacking. They were reminding the galaxy of what had been done, of what everyone had watched, of what they had allowed to happen. It was vengeance in its purest form. Cold, methodical, and without a hint of mercy. Threx wasn't the only one who realized it. Panic swept through conquered space like wildfire. Planets began arming civilian outposts. Black market tech surged in value overnight. Doomsday cults rose up claiming the humans had ascended into some godlike species, returned now to punish the wicked. But it wasn't gods, it was men. Men who had suffered. Men who had buried their own children in ash. Men who remembered the day the conquered shut off aid relays, when they jammed distress calls, when they signed embargoes to starve Earth into submission, all to keep it from growing too fast, becoming too strong. They thought humans would fight back loud, messy, desperate. But instead, Earth went quiet. No more ambassadors, no more deals, no more diplomacy, just years of silence. Years they spent building something else. The turning point, the moment the conquered finally realized this was beyond control, was Project Lazarus. It was a classified bioresearch facility buried beneath the ice of Clis 4. The conquered's answer to human aggression. They had been developing hybrid soldiers, gene-spliced creatures with human DNA and alien tech. Stronger, faster, soulless. And it was their dirtiest secret. No one knew Earth found out, until the broadcast. Every screen across every conquered system lit up at the same moment. There was no network to trace, no encryption to block it, just a black screen and a voice. Low, male, human. You made monsters in our image. Then the video began. Raw, unedited. It showed the labs, the experiments, the failures, human children dissected, cloned, gutted for weapon research. The video ended with one final clip. A group of hybrid soldiers, lifeless on the floor, each with a single bullet hole between the eyes, and one message burned into the wall behind them. We found your monsters. We sent them home. Conquered systems went into full lockdown after that. Protests broke out on hundreds of worlds. Half of the conquered Senate demanded answers. The other half fled their posts. Earth had stopped speaking. Now it was showing. Threx sat alone in his quarters that night. He couldn't sleep. The faces from the footage haunted him. Not just the dead children. Not just the experiments. But the look on the human hybrids' faces. They weren't angry. They weren't scared. They were empty. Stripped of identity, of soul. And someone from Earth, had walked in, looked them in the eye, and pulled the trigger anyway. Not out of cruelty, but because letting them live would have been worse. That's what haunted Threx. Not that humans were seeking revenge, not that they were dismantling the galaxy piece by piece, but that maybe, just maybe, they were right to. And if that was true, then no one was safe. Not because of what Earth had become, but because of what the rest of the galaxy hadn't done. They called him Corvin, but that wasn't his name. His real name had been stripped from every record, burned from the walls of ruined cities, and buried in the ash of old Earth. He didn't speak it. Didn't need to. Corvin was dead. What remained was the shadow of a man who watched everything he loved get crushed beneath the indifferent boot of a galaxy that decided Earth wasn't worth saving. He remembered it all, the slow suffocation, the desperate screams from hospitals without power, the hunger that turned civilized men into beasts. And he remembered how the sky stayed silent. No ships, no aid, no flags of peace, just silence as the world burned from the inside out. He had been 23 when the Conquered imposed the embargo, a junior tech officer in the Sol Defense Corps. Not a soldier, not a leader, just a cog in the wheel of Earth's fractured, overstretched military machine. But when the system collapsed, when satellites fell from the sky, and the planet turned on itself, that cog kept moving. Not because he was brave, but because there was nothing else to do. The day his brother died, starved to death in front of him, Corvin swore two things he would never forget, and he would never forgive. For years, they lived underground. What remained of Earth's fragmented forces formed what they called the Core, a loose coalition of survivors, engineers, scientists, and ex-military who refused to accept the death sentence handed to them by the stars. They scavenged, stole, and reinvented everything. No more reliance on conquered tech, no more diplomacy. Earth wasn't going to crawl back to the table like a beaten dog. It would evolve. Corvin wasn't a soldier, but he became one. Not by training, but by necessity. He learned to kill not for ideology, but survival. And over time, something inside him changed. He stopped seeing aliens as people. He stopped seeing anything outside Earth as alive, because they had made their choice. The breaking point came with Operation Sundown, the final push. It was Earth's last attempt to send a signal through the Concord's enforced jamming network. A massive underground transmission array was built beneath the ruins of Old Geneva, designed to punch through the interference. They called it the Last Shout. Corvin was on the engineering team. They worked night and day, rationed air and water, bled into circuit boards with trembling hands. And when it was ready, when the massive array powered up and fired their final desperate cry into the stars, they waited and waited. No reply. 3 days later, orbital weapons rained down on the site. Concord satellites had picked up the signal. The array was classified as a militant resurgence threat. They erased it, wiped out over 4,000 survivors in a single coordinated orbital strike. Corvin survived. Barely. He dug himself out of the rubble. Skin burned, lungs full of dust, and soul scraped raw. He wandered the ruins for 2 days before he found anyone else. There weren't many, but those that did survive, they weren't the same anymore. And that's when the change began. The core split. The soft ones, the diplomats, the idealists, left for hidden colonies in deep space, but the rest, the ones like Corvin, they stayed. They rebuilt. They stopped calling themselves survivors. They became revenants. The ship Corvin flew now was called HFY. It was small, sleek, silent, and built from the bones of stolen Concorde frigates. Nothing on it was standard. It had no broadcast signal, no insignia, and its AI didn't speak unless spoken to. It wasn't a warship. It was a weapon of memory. Today, HFY floated just outside the perimeter of a Concorde listening post deep within Sector 19, a quiet place. Remote, lightly manned, not strategic, not dangerous, but it had once been the relay that blocked Earth's distress calls. Corvin stared through the reinforced viewport, his gloved hand resting gently against the hull. Inside, he could see the alien crew, 2 officers, 4 analysts, none of them armed. Just staring at their monitors, sipping synth coffee, laughing. He blinked once, and the airlock behind him slid open. 4 revenants stepped forward, all silent, all armed, not with lasers, not with Gauss rifles. They didn't need them anymore. Corvin walked first. The moment they breached the station, the emergency systems triggered, but not fast enough. The revenants moved like shadows, slipping between lights, appearing inside rooms like the darkness itself had taken shape. No one even had time to scream. Corvin found the station chief cowering beneath his desk, clutching an old ceremonial blade, some family relic passed down through generations. His blue skin shook, and his mandibles clicked in raw terror. "Please," he whispered in broken English, "I had nothing to do with Earth." Corvin knelt slowly. His voice was soft, calm. You maintained this station. I only follow orders. You blocked signals from Earth for 4 years. I didn't know. That's the thing, Corvin whispered, his eyes colder than the stars outside. You never needed to know. You just had to care. The blade slid between the alien's ribs, silent and efficient. Not rage, not torture, just justice, stripped bare of sympathy. They didn't burn the station. Didn't destroy it. They erased every data archive, scrubbed every log, dismantled the relay core by hand. When the Concord finally arrived 3 hours later, all that remained were 6 bodies and a message burned into the command console. For every ignored signal, a silence repaid. Corvin didn't wait around. Ashwake vanished into FTL, gone before the Concord even knew what had hit them. There was no pleasure in what he did, no satisfaction. Corvin didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. This wasn't vengeance, not anymore. It was balance. The galaxy had made a decision long ago. Earth was disposable, a rogue planet. Too independent, too strong-willed, too human. Now the galaxy would learn what Earth truly was when it stopped being civilized. It wasn't rage that fueled Corvin. It was memory. He remembered the little things. His brother's laugh. The smell of burnt coffee in their kitchen during winter blackouts. The sound of radio static when they tried to contact Mars and only got silence. The image of his mother's hands, trembling as she tried to hide how thin she'd become. He remembered being ignored. And now he made sure no one else forgot. But Corvin also knew the day would come, when someone tried to stop him. Someone smart, someone dangerous. The Concord couldn't ignore the Revenants forever, and that was fine, because Earth didn't need to win. It just needed them to bleed, to remember, to feel. And as Ashwake vanished into deep space once again, Corvin closed his eyes and whispered something no one else heard. Something not for the galaxy, not even for the Concord, just for himself. We are not gone. They called it Operation Final Ember, a name born not from hope, but fear. It wasn't about extinguishing a flame. It was about catching the last flicker before it burned the whole damn house down. The Concord was unraveling. Entire sectors were shutting down external traffic. Border patrols tripled. Trade collapsed. Civil unrest was spreading like an infection. Entire civilizations who once mocked Earth now whispered the word revenant, like a curse, like a warning, like a prophecy. So the Concord High Council made a move it had sworn never to make. They called Captain Roan Vale out of exile. He wasn't a politician, wasn't a desk jockey general with medals earned through reports and speeches. Roan had been there, boots on Earth, back when things started to fall apart. He'd led peacekeeping operations in the South Belt riots. He was one of the last off-world officers who still spoke fluent Terran English. Because Roan hadn't just studied humans. He had fought with them, laughed with them, and watched them die. So they gave him a mission no one else wanted. Find the Revenants, bring them to heel, or kill them. Roan stood in the center of Task Force Helion, a temporary command unit assembled in deep orbit around the planet Arvex. The room was sterile, typical Concord style. Too clean, too cold, no soul. Across from him sat a handful of military brass and tech analysts who had never seen blood. They talked in metrics and projections, throwing around terms like containment thresholds and acceptable casualties. But Roan? He only stared at the screen in front of him. A still frame. Corvin. The face was older now, harder, but Roan knew those eyes. He remembered the boy they belonged to. Young, reckless, brilliant. A pain in the ass, but good. Too good for what the galaxy had done to him. We believe he's leading the raids, one analyst said. Revenant strike groups operate in cells, independent. But they all report to him. Roan didn't respond. He already knew that. He was listed as KIA during the Geneva strike, another officer added. Your records, Roan said, his voice flat, are garbage. They bristled. He didn't care. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Roan sat in silence. He stared at the small, worn patch stitched into his old service uniform, the one he'd refused to throw away, even after the Concord branded Earth's remnants as classified history. It read, SDF-17, Chipekan Unity is Survival. He remembered the last time he saw Corvin. They were knee-deep in rubble, dragging wounded out of a collapsed tunnel system in Sector 12. Corvin had been one of the engineers trying to keep the shields online as orbital debris rained down like hellfire. The young man had bled from his shoulder and still kept rewiring relays with one hand, teeth clenched, body shaking. Roan had helped him out. Carried him, even. And as they waited for evac that never came, Corvin said something Roan never forgot. They're not coming, are they? Roan wanted to lie, wanted to give the kid hope, but even then, he knew. No, he'd said. Corvin didn't cry, didn't scream. He just nodded once. That was the last time Roan saw him alive. Back in the present, Roan studied the strike patterns. Every hit, every ghosted station, every erased data archive. It wasn't random, it wasn't terror, it was surgical. Corvin was doing exactly what Roan feared, not just hurting the Concord, but disassembling it, piece by piece, memory by memory, and worse, he was winning hearts. Across the fringe colonies, whispers spread of humans who returned not as monsters but judges, revenants who struck only those responsible, who killed clean, who sent messages, not massacres. People were starting to question the official story, starting to remember, starting to wonder if Earth was the villain or the victim. And Roan had been sent to fix that. His first target was a deep space refueling station in orbit around Calyx's grave, a long-forgotten system used mostly for illegal salvage. 3 days ago, it had been wiped clean. No survivors, no transmissions. But what made it different was the signature. This time the attackers left something behind. A body. Roan stepped into the morgue personally. No delegation, no assistance. Just him, the corpse, and the silence. The man was Terran, genetically confirmed, revenant armor, shot through the temple, but not by Concord weapons. It was an execution. Roan leaned closer. The skin was pale, the expression neutral, no signs of a struggle. He wasn't captured. He was sacrificed, and burned into the man's chest plate, carved crudely with some kind of blade, were the words. He spoke too much. Roan stepped back. This wasn't a rebellion. This was something far more terrifying. Discipline. A few days later, Helion picked up a faint energy signature in the Dralos Nebula, an area known for magnetic interference and rogue mining vessels. It was a long shot, but Roan went anyway. Inside the nebula, they found wreckage, old Concord drones, floating debris, melted hulls. But beneath it all, hidden under layers of radiation and stealth shielding, they found a signal. Encrypted. Old Earth military grade. Only a handful of people in the galaxy still knew how to decode it. Roan was one of them. He keyed it in. A voice crackled through the static. Not automated. Not a warning. Captain Vale, the voice said. Calm. Familiar. Human. You should have stayed out of this. Roan froze. Corvin. You don't know what you're doing, Corvin continued. They'll use you, like they used us, and when you're no longer useful, they'll erase you too. Roan activated the return channel. Corvin, if you can hear me, talk to me. This doesn't have to end in blood. A pause. Then, it already did. The signal cut. And Roan knew. This wasn't a chase. This was a test. Corvin was watching, listening, waiting, and now, Roan had a choice. Back on Helion, the Council demanded action. They wanted strikes, raids, immediate retaliation. But Roan knew better. They'd never find the Revenants that way. He needed something else. A ghost. So he reached out to an old name. A woman named Selene Mar, once a conquered infiltration agent embedded in Earth's diplomatic division. She had disappeared during the embargo, presumed dead. She wasn't. Roan found her living under an alias on a mining world in the outer sectors. Quiet, alone, drinking herself into oblivion. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You came to ask me if they're monsters," she said, not even offering him a seat. "But you already know the answer." "I came to ask why they haven't killed everyone yet." She paused, then said the truth. "Because they still remember who they were." That night, Roan stared out into the stars, wondering if he was chasing an enemy or running from the truth, because deep down he knew something no one else on Helion understood. The Revenants weren't trying to destroy the galaxy. They were trying to hold it accountable. And if they failed, they'd go down knowing they were the last humans who still gave a damn. The meeting was never official. No record, no escort, no witnesses. Roan insisted on going alone. No drones, no surveillance, just a single shuttle, stripped of weapons and stripped of pride, drifting silently into the heart of the Osean Divide, a dead region of space littered with wrecked satellites and forgotten war relics, a graveyard of silence. The location had been chosen by the Revenants. He knew it was a trap. But he didn't care. This wasn't about survival. This was about truth. Ashwick was already there when he arrived. She hovered in perfect stillness, her black hull almost invisible against the void, like a wound in space that refused to close. Roan docked his shuttle. No lockdown, no shields. He didn't even carry a sidearm. The airlock opened with a hiss. Corvin stood on the other side, arms crossed over his chest, armored but unarmed, like a ghost welcoming the living into the land of the dead. For a long moment, neither man moved. Roan took a slow breath. "Still hate formalities, I see." Corvin's face didn't move. "Still clinging to them, I see." They stood in silence. Then Roan stepped in. Ashwake's interior was colder than he expected, not temperature-wise, but emotionally. No sound, no hum of idle systems, just a deep, engineered quiet. Sterile, efficient, heartless, like everything Concord once accused humans of not being. "You came," Corvin said finally. "I always said I would." "You said a lot of things." Roan nodded. "So did you." They walked together, slowly through the narrow corridors of the ship, past closed doors that likely held more than weapons. Roan could feel the presence of others, watching, measuring. He didn't speak again until they reached the command deck. "I need to understand, Corvin. Why this way?" Corvin turned to face him fully, and for the first time, Roan saw just how deep the years had cut him. His face was leaner, harder. The soft angles of youth had been chiseled away by fire and loss. His eyes, once sharp and questioning, now looked like someone had torn out the soul behind them and left only the mission. "This is the only way," Corvin said. "The galaxy doesn't listen to warnings. It buries them, twists them, turns them into footnotes." Roan didn't look away. "And this, executions, disappearances, sabotage, you think this will change anything?" "It already has," Corvin said. "Then what do you need me for?" Corvin's silence was heavy. "I didn't ask you here to change my mind," he said quietly. "I asked you here to make sure you don't forget who we were. Because when this ends, and it will end, Roan, they'll rewrite everything." Roan stared at him. "Then stop. Let's write it together. Fix it before there's nothing left to remember." Corvin let out a small, bitter laugh. You really believe that? I have to. You still think the Conquered is a system worth saving? I don't think anything's worth saving if we let you turn Earth into a monster. Corvin stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. I didn't turn Earth into a monster. They did. All I've done is hold up the mirror. Rowan's jaw tightened. So you kill civilians? Engineers? Researchers who had nothing to do with the embargo? That's justice to you? No. That's the language the galaxy finally understands. Rowan's fists clenched at his sides. You sound like the bastards who left you to die. I became what I needed to survive them. They stood there, two relics of a dying truth, breathing in the space between forgiveness and vengeance. Rowan shook his head. You were better than this, Corvin. I was weaker than this. There's a difference. No, you were human. A pause, then Corvin's voice dropped to a whisper. And what did humanity ever get us, Rowan? A mass grave and a forgotten history? Rowan didn't answer, because deep down, he didn't know anymore. They sat in the command room, side by side, but worlds apart. There were no guards, no weapons between them, only memory. Corvin reached into a drawer and pulled out a small metal box. Dented, scratched, battered by time. He slid it toward Rowan. What's this? Rowan asked. Corvin didn't answer. Rowan opened it. Inside was a voice recorder, old tech, Terran model, manual switch. Rowan pressed play. A voice crackled through the static. Female, tired, shaking. This is Medical Officer Rena Kells, SDF-17. We are out of power, all rations exhausted. Requesting emergency evac. Please, we have children. Rowan's breath caught. He remembered that voice. It played again. A loop. 15 seconds of desperation. Repeated. Where did you find this? He whispered. Corvin's voice was made of gravel now. In the ruins of Geneva, beneath the transmitter, the one Conquered bombed to keep us quiet. Rowan stared at the device like it burned his hands. It played for 6 years, Corvin said. Every day, on a loop, into empty air. Rowan looked up slowly. And this is why you killed them? No, Corvin said. This is why I let them live long enough to understand what they did. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was heavy. Punishing. Then Corvin stood. This is the last time we speak. Rowan stood too. You're going to keep going? I'm going to finish what they started. And if I come for you next time? Corvin nodded. Then I'll finally know you believe them more than us. They stared at each other. Then, slowly, Rowan extended a hand. Corvin looked at it, didn't take it, but didn't walk away. Instead he said, You want to understand me? Then stop chasing answers in council chambers. Go back to Earth. What's left of it. See what they buried. Then he turned and left. And Rowan knew. This wasn't a war between men. It was a war between memory and myth. And he wasn't sure which one he was fighting for anymore. There were no landing protocols, no orbital defenses, no welcome. Rowan's ship descended through the upper atmosphere of Earth, like a trespasser. The once blue sky was now a washed-out gray, forever dimmed by decades of environmental collapse and orbital debris clouds that never fully cleared. It didn't rain, it wept, a thin metallic mist that carried ash in its wake. Earth, once loud, once defiant, was now a planet of whispers. He landed just outside what used to be old Geneva, or what was left of it. His boots hit cracked stone, half buried in the ruins of a city scorched by orbital fire. Twisted girders jutted out like the bones of a rotted carcass. Buildings that once housed diplomats and leaders now stood as hollow shells, their windows blind, their walls crumbling. Rowan stepped through the wasteland, the wind pulling at the edges of his coat like unseen hands. He hadn't been back since the evac. He wasn't prepared. The first thing he noticed wasn't the destruction. It wasn't even the silence. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from trauma that never got to heal. The kind that lingers, permanent, like the ghost of a scream too loud to forget. He moved toward the coordinates Corvan had given him. A half-collapsed structure buried beneath the city, once a diplomatic annex, now a tomb. The entrance was sealed with a steel slab, warped from heat. Roan dug through the rubble for 20 minutes before finding the manual override, the old human kind, one that didn't need networks or access codes, just blood, grit, and stubbornness. He forced the door open and descended into the dark. The underground tunnels were surprisingly intact. He swept his flashlight across long corridors coated in dust and soot. Old signs still lined the walls, their words barely legible. Shelter Bay, 4, Transmission Core Access, Medical Triage. He followed the signs, past abandoned bunk rooms where thin metal beds still held the remains of those who never left, past the skeleton of a dining hall where plates and spoons still sat in place, untouched since the day silence fell. It wasn't a military bunker, it was a grave, a community that had believed, naively, that someone would come, that the conquered would care. Roan found the transmission core in a chamber buried 4 levels beneath the surface. It was blackened from fire, half the walls caved in, but the equipment was unmistakably human. Analog switches, reinforced cabling, heavy industrial consoles with no remote kill codes. This wasn't conquered design. It was desperate, primitive, resilient. He approached the central terminal. A cracked monitor still blinked, barely alive, barely functional. He tapped the keyboard. Nothing. He bypassed the power relay manually, rerouting from a wall panel so old he had to remove melted insulation with his bare hands. Sparks flew. The system hummed. The screen flickered. A log interface appeared. User MedTech ARC last entry. 28 years ago, Roan accessed the logs. They weren't files. They were confessions. Entry 0001. Day 3. We've sealed the outer doors. They said the Conquered would send a response within 72 hours. We're running on backup generators. Food will last maybe 2 weeks. Spirits are high. I think we're going to be okay. Entry 009. Day 11. No word. Still nothing. The kids are getting scared. Kellen keeps saying she saw a message from one of the Martian outposts, but the signal was distorted. I think it was just feedback. Entry 0221, Day 19. We've lost triage power. Half the medical bay is in the dark. We rationed oxygen. Everyone voted. We're prioritizing the youngest. No one argued. Not even the parents. That's what makes it worse. Entry 035. Day 26. They're not coming, the logs continued. Roan sat in front of the terminal for nearly an hour, reading each one. Some were journal entries. Some were technical attempts to ping satellites. Others were voice memos of children singing to themselves in the dark. By the time he reached the last entry, he wasn't breathing. Entry 076. Day 41. We buried the last child today. The final broadcast loop is running. If anyone hears this, please don't let this disappear, even if it's too late to save us. Remember us. Don't let them lie. Roan leaned back, hands shaking. He had spent his entire career believing Earth had been unstable, chaotic, self-destructive, politically reckless. But this was systematic abandonment, planned, executed, covered, and they never buried the dead. They buried the truth. He stumbled out of the shelter in a haze. The wind hit him like a slap. Hard, cold, unforgiving. Roan sank to his knees outside the hatch. He thought of Corvan, young, angry, righteous. and realized that every word the man had spoken was true. The Revenants weren't just fighting back. They were the only ones who hadn't lost their humanity. It was the rest of the galaxy that had. He spent the night inside one of the abandoned shelters, curled up beside an old steel cot. His dreams were a collage of screaming voices, burning cities, and Corvin's face. Not the killer, not the Revenant, but the kid who once asked him, "They're not coming, are they?" And Roan had said no. He woke before dawn. The sun didn't rise, not really. The clouds above were too thick, and the ash storms too constant. But the light changed slightly, enough to see. He left a small metal tag at the entrance of the shelter, a Concord insignia. His. He scratched a single line into it with his knife. I was wrong. Then he boarded his ship. Back on the Helion, Roan didn't speak to anyone. He shut himself inside his command quarters, sealed the doors, and stared at the old voice recorder Corvan had given him. The loop still played when powered. "Requesting emergency evac. Please. We have children." He played it once, twice. On the third loop, he crushed it in his fist. Not in rage, in mourning. He submitted no mission report, no tactical briefing. No enemy positions, just a simple message flagged for high command. Operation Final Ember is unsanctioned. The Revenants are not enemies. They are consequences. He didn't wait for a response, because none would come. The first conquered world to fall wasn't attacked. It voted. The planet Icaros Prime, long known for its military shipyards and unwavering loyalty to conquered authority, held a public referendum. Broadcast across the system without permission, without protocol. It lasted just 6 minutes, and when it ended, they announced their decision loud and clear. We no longer recognize Concord Command. That single declaration triggered a cascade that spread like wildfire across dozens of outer rim worlds. But it wasn't just political, because at the same time, coordinated leaks began hitting data streams across all sectors, documents, recordings, files once buried beneath redacted archives and encrypted vaults. Proof, the embargo, the sabotage, the orbital strikes, the manipulation of aid routes, the systematic erasure of Earth's last days, all of it, out in the open, and stamped with one symbol burned into every leaked transmission. Our in Concord High Command, chaos reigned. Every internal system was compromised. Encrypted channels were hijacked and turned into confessionals. Entire colonies were now demanding their own audits. Civil unrest reached boiling point on Elysian IV, where protesters broke into a Senate hall and projected Earth's death logs onto the Sky Dome. Thousands watched as Officer Kells's final words echoed across the stars. Even if it's too late to save us, remember us. Don't let them lie. Fleet movements froze. Trusted generals resigned. Whole battalions refused orders, throwing down their weapons and declaring themselves independent Terran allies, ITA cells that didn't serve the Revenants, but refused to fight them either. The Conquered had spent decades erasing Earth's story. And now? Now the truth was weaponized. Corvin stood aboard the Ashwake, watching the digital avalanche unfold across every major channel. The bridge was silent, not out of fear, but anticipation. This was the moment he'd built toward. Not revenge, reckoning. His second-in-command, a revenant named Arlen, a grizzled ex-captain who lost his family in the famine bombings, approached from the shadows. "It's working," Arlen said, "but they'll lash out." "Let them," Corvin replied. "The more they tighten their grip, the more fractures they reveal." "We've reached the edge, Corvin," Arlen warned. "You pull the trigger now, this war won't end with just a shift in power. It'll be extinction." Corvin didn't flinch. "This isn't war anymore. It's correction." Arlen hesitated. "Even if it burns everything down?" Corvin turned. If it burns down the lie they built, then we're finally free. But Corvin wasn't blind. He knew the Conquered still had weapons, tools. Desperation was often the most dangerous force in the universe. So he prepared for the endgame. Operation Solvale, a single strike, one shot, not against a planet, not a city, but the Archive Spire, a heavily fortified, orbit-locked citadel housing every remaining backup of Conquered historical records, AI codices, and encryption root protocols. It was the final failsafe, the last piece of infrastructure tying the old regime together. Destroy it, and the system collapses permanently. But the spire was impenetrable. No approach vector, no weak spots, unless someone on the inside helped. Rowan Vale sat alone in his private quarters aboard the Helion, watching the chaos spread sector by sector. He had remained silent since Earth, hadn't answered High Command's summons, hadn't submitted to court-martial, hadn't denied the accusations flooding the net. Instead, he watched a galaxy implode on its own lies. He thought about Corvin, thought about the looped message from Geneva, thought about the children who died in darkness while leaders toasted to stability. And when the encoded message came through, no name, just a single phrase encrypted in an old Earth cipher, he didn't hesitate to open it. You always said you'd know when it mattered. This is when. Attached was a data map. The Archive Spire, entry coordinates, weak points, escape routes, from the inside. Corvin had just sent him a choice, not an invitation, a test. Rowan closed the message, stared at the stars, and made his decision. The next day, a transport vessel carrying maintenance personnel to the Archive Spire was cleared for docking. Rowan was among them, wearing an old mechanic's uniform, tools strapped to his belt. No weapons, only purpose. The spire was a gleaming tower, silver and black, spiraling like a needle stabbed into the edge of the universe. Everything inside was pristine, cold, precise. It wasn't a building. It was an algorithm made solid. Rowan moved through it like a shadow, avoiding unnecessary contact, blending in. His face was flagged on Conquered alerts. But the spire hadn't updated its security clearance in 2 days. Fallout from the information leaks, a crack in the system, all Corvan needed, and Rowan was the hand to split it open. The plan was simple. Overload the central memory core. Trigger a cascade through the thermal regulation system. By the time anyone noticed, the core would collapse inward, a controlled implosion, enough to destroy every databank. But what Rowan didn't expect was the terminal, room 417A, buried beneath sub-level 3. It was a sealed room, off-grid, no active personnel, no reason to exist, except for what was inside. He cracked the lock manually. Inside were Earth logs, thousands of them, unaltered, raw, stored in isolation, not for deletion, for preservation. He accessed one, then another, then another. He saw footage from old refugee camps, intercepted distress signals, private Conquered communications admitting what was being done. He found an audio file labeled simply G14 Eulogy. It was a Conquered admiral, an old man Rowan remembered once speaking at the Earth tribunals. We couldn't let Earth grow, not anymore. They didn't bend, they didn't submit. They questioned everything. And in a system built on obedience, that kind of defiance is viral. So we let them die. We didn't kill them, not directly, but we allowed it, deliberately, slowly, and then we made everyone forget. Rowan leaned back. He was supposed to destroy this place. Now he wasn't sure. Because this wasn't propaganda. This was confession. He contacted Corvin, an encrypted line. No pleasantries. Rowan. You knew. Corvin. Yes. Rowan. Why preserve it? Corvin. Because some truths don't burn. They bury. Rowan. You could have destroyed this long ago. Corvin. Not until someone else was willing to look. Roan closed his eyes. You want me to make the choice? Corvin's reply was soft. No. I want you to understand it. 10 hours later, the Archive Spire's outer defense array collapsed in a staged overload. Ashwake emerged from stealth, and for 5 minutes the orbit was quiet. No conquered reinforcements, no resistance. Roan walked out of the Spire's east bay holding a single encrypted drive. Everything else inside? Burned. Corvin met him at the extraction point. Roan tossed the drive at his feet. It's all there, he said. Every secret, every crime. Corvin picked it up. You kept a copy? No, Roan said. You did. He turned away, started walking. Corvin called after him. Do you still believe we're wrong? Roan didn't stop. Not anymore. Across the stars, the conquered system began to fall apart. Without the Archive Spire, entire administrative networks collapsed. AI governance systems defaulted. Sectors declared independence, forming provisional alliances. Some turned violent, others found peace. No one knew what would come next. But one message spread across every screen, every frequency, every wall. We were silent. You made us that way. Now listen. The galaxy didn't end in fire. It ended in fragmentation. In the weeks following the destruction of the Archive Spire, the Conquered fell apart like a rotted machine finally snapping under its own weight. Command chains broke, alliances splintered, colonies declared independence not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. No one knew who was in charge anymore, and that was exactly what Corvin had counted on. But victory tasted like ash. Ashwake drifted in the shadows of a cold, red dwarf system, running silent. Its hull was scarred from decades of warfare, a patchwork of earthborn steel and stolen conquered alloy, cracked and pitted like Corvin himself. He stood on the bridge alone. Arlen was gone. Most of the other revenants had scattered, some to deep space colonies, some to fringe systems looking for something resembling peace. The mission was over, but the damage wasn't. Corvin hadn't spoken in days, not since Roan, not since the Spire burned, and everything they had worked toward crumbled into a strange, heavy quiet. It was the same kind of silence Earth had suffered under. Only now it echoed back from every corner of the galaxy. The message came at midnight ship time. Encrypted. Old Earth code. No origin tag. Corvin played it without hesitation. Roan's voice. The system's dead. You broke it. We broke it. Now it's just survivors. You know what that means. They'll look to you. Not as a symbol, not as a ghost, as a leader. And I don't know if you're ready for that. But they'll follow you anyway. So choose carefully, Corvin. What you build now becomes their next belief. The message ended, and Corvin just stood there, breathing in the weight of it. He hadn't built this to rule. He had built it to remember. But memory has a price, and now it wanted interest. The next day, a small vessel requested docking with Ashwake. It was unarmed, civilian class. Its signal pinged a unique identifier known only to a handful of surviving revenants. It was from Earth. Corvin allowed it in. The airlock hissed. And from the other side stepped a woman in her 60s, wrapped in a travel cloak, her face gaunt but her eyes alive. She looked at Corvin like someone seeing a ghost, and a memory wrapped into one. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Until she whispered, I thought you were dead. Corvin's voice cracked for the first time in years. So did I. Her name was Dr. Vela Harrow, once a lead humanitarian coordinator for the outer settlements during the early embargo. She had vanished when the Conquered declared Earth irreparable. She hadn't vanished. She had stayed behind. And survived. I kept my head down, she said, sitting across from Corvin in Ashwake's observation chamber. Helped where I could, fed who I could. But the more the silence grew, the harder it got. Until the only thing left to feed them was hope. She pulled out a small storage crystal, placed it gently on the table between them. "What's this?" Corvin asked. "The truth, again, from people who lived it, not just died in it." He picked it up. Inside were thousands of files, not logs, not military records, but stories, survivors, journal entries, recovered messages, children talking about their parents, artists sketching what it felt like to lose color, teachers recording lullabies for students who never made it to class. "Your war made them listen," she said. "Now give them something to listen to." Corvin stared at the crystal like it was heavier than any weapon he'd ever held. Because it was. He released the files a week later, not with a speech, not with a threat. Just a simple signal broadcast across every known sector. "You heard our silence, you saw our fire, now see our truth." The data package was tagged with one name, not Corvin, not Revenants, just Earth. Roan stood aboard a refugee ship 2 systems away, watching as a room full of displaced colonists, once terrified of the name Corvin, now sat in silence, listening to the voices of long-dead Terrans whispering through the speakers. A little boy asked his mother what happened to the people in the story. She didn't know how to answer. So Roan did. "They didn't die," he said quietly. "They became something stronger than fear." The boy asked if they'd ever come back. Roan only smiled. "They already have." In the months that followed, chaos gave way to remapping. Civil war never came. Neither did peace. What came instead was reckoning. New factions emerged, not empires, not regimes, networks, cooperatives, colonies unified by shared memory instead of imposed order. Some worshipped the Revenants like gods, others called them terrorists, but most just called them proof. Proof that no system, no council, no archive could outlast the weight of truth, especially one delivered in silence. And Corvin? He disappeared. Some say Ashwake was last seen drifting near the ruins of old Mars. Others claim he returned to Earth. Some believe he died in the war, and everything afterward was myth. But a message circulates once a year on the old Earth broadcast band. No tag, no ID, just a voice. His voice. "We are not gone. We are not quiet. We are watching. Speak the truth, or we will." And across every sector, under every sky, people remember, not just the fear, but the fire that came after, the silence that became a roar, and the world that went quiet, only to rise louder than anyone had ever imagined.